Welcome to SHOWstudio's live Fashion Week panel discussions. In these conversations, experts from all across the industry debate the most important fashion shows and themes of the season. I'm your host for today, Hetty Mahlich. I'm the features editor at SHOWstudio. And today we're joined by some brilliant panelists to talk about fashion in the age of Web 3.0 and the metaverse. If you're watching at home and those words mean absolutely nothing to you, don't worry, because we've got a little intro video which we're going to watch now before I get my panelists to introduce myself. So Michael, Tech Whiz, could you play the video, please? And then we'll talk.
Fashion's next chapter has been gearing up for over 20 years. Fearlessly experimenting with new ways to communicate fashion, SHOWstudio and Knit Night were the first to use 3D scanning and printing technology to digitise models, clothes and even Kanye West. This desire to revolutionise how we see fashion fast evolved into engaging with CGI and artificial intelligence, setting a precedent for the virtual runways and online spaces the industry has become infatuated with all these years later. Over the past 2 years, fashion's digital revolution has been accelerated by the pandemic, forcing fashion to engage in new methods of communication. The move towards technologies including 3D, artificial and virtual intelligence and non-fungible tokens has been gearing up for some time and is commonplace in communities outside of fashion. Platforms and apps including Facebook and Google and Snapchat have invested billions into 3D and AR. Even Tommy Hilfiger put virtual reality headsets into stores for customers to watch their runway show back in 2017. But in 2022, post-Facebook's Meta announcement, the world is more ready than ever for what is now known as the metaverse, a yet-to-be-realised space where the virtual and the real coexist. Select luxury brands have jumped at the opportunity to monetize their designs as digital assets, engaging with the online gaming community and reaching out to a new, often younger consumer base. Balenciaga and Gucci have become two of the leading players. Gucci has launched experiences on Roblox and Zapito and will soon be creating a world within the virtual world of Sandbot, whilst as Balenciaga, together with Moncler, created a line of clothes for the gaming platform Fortnite. Louis Vuitton, Prada, Burberry, Diesel and Givenchy are amongst those who have jumped on the craze for NFTs, which have taken the art and fashion worlds by storm. In March 2021, the auction house Christie's sold an NFT by the digital artist Beeple for £69 million. NFTs are digital assets which live on blockchains and record the buyer's ownership. Purchased using cryptocurrencies which live in a user's digital wallet, for autumn-winter 2022, Fendi even sent crypto hardware accessories down their real-life runway. Elsewhere, fashion designers like Hanifa, Patrick McDowell and Martine Rose have hosted immersive digital fashion shows, with Digital Fashion Week New York taking place in February 2022, and virtual platform Decentraland planning a metaverse fashion week for March. Digital-only fashion designers are also on the rise. In June 2021, the brand Ouroboros became the first to show a digital-only ready-to-wear collection at a major global fashion week in London. Digital fashion designs can be accessed by purchasing digital assets through designers and platforms, worn by a user's digital avatar or dressed to photographs. Accessible through marketplaces including The Dematerialized, The Fabricant and DressX, brands and platforms such as Farfetch are also using 3D renders of clothes to dress models, brand ambassadors and consumers, making clothes accessible without a physical presence. In short, fashion is only just getting started. Stay tuned and enter the metaverse with SHOWstudio.
Sorry, I kept muting myself. Don't know what's happening there. And before we dive in, I would love you guys to introduce yourselves. So Taskin, can we start with you?
So thank you for having me. My name is Taskin Goec. I'm a fashion designer from Berlin, and I actually started in traditional fashion. I worked in digital fashion, and now, to put it in a nutshell, I'm kind of bridging those two worlds.
Amazing. Peter, can we go to you next?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. So I'm the founder and CEO of Beyond Form, which is a fashion tech venture studio. So we build and invest in early stage fashion tech startups. So we have 15 startups in the portfolio at the moment, and we have a few of them dealing with digital fashion and the metaverse.
Jasmine?
Hi, my name is Jasmine Asia. I'm a gamer and a model, and I feel like I represent stylish gamers, gamers that love fashion, gamers that like to dress up. And being a model as well, it's like really interesting, and I feel like a virtual character every day. So yeah.
Cool. Alyssa, let's go to you next.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. I'm a creative consultant, stylist, and trend forecaster based in New York, and I also work on the buying team in Calvin.
Amazing. I think we've got some really interesting different perspectives to kind of look at a lot of the key themes that are kind of defining the world of digital fashion and also fashion and gaming today. So we've got a lot to get through, so I think let's get stuck in. I want to start by talking about why this kind of particular moment, because I think, as was kind of hinted in that video, everything that we're seeing at the moment is underpinned by a lot of technologies which have actually been developing for kind of decades longer. It's over the past couple of years that this has really picked up in the world of fashion. Like fashion schools like LCF, London College of Fashion, are now offering kind of courses in digital fashion and 3D technology. As was touched on in that video, the market for artificial intelligence and virtual realities and augmented reality is expected to reach $97 billion by 2025, which is kind of crazy. And then obviously we've got kind of brands like Balenciaga and Moncler engaging with these gaming platforms like Fortnite. Last year, Balenciaga launched, they have a new kind of chief metaverse officer. So I don't think this panel is going to kind of debate whether the metaverse is happening. I think it's become clear, especially over the last few months, like this yet to be realized world is happening, and brands are engaging with that for a number of different reasons, which we're going to kind of go into. But yeah, I want to start by talking about why this moment and why has the fashion industry started to engage in such a rigorous way with it, especially over the past 2 years. Jasmine, I want to jump to you first, because I do think that fashion gaming is kind of a good jumping off point, because I think that seems to be the area that a lot of brands have kind of touched into more. What's your kind of view on why there's been this boost in engagement?
I think it's because of, obviously it's because COVID, we were staying home, we're online a lot more. But as a gamer, the metaverse isn't like a new thing. Like I was looking at this, like, this is just like virtual online spaces. Like this has been going on for decades. And I think only now fashion is just seeing like, there's a huge market for it. There's people who are passionate about making new designs. And like I've seen stuff like this before, like 10 years ago, like Stardoll. It was like its own type of metaverse in a way. It was like a Facebook for like girls who are like teenagers, but there were still brands on there who created their own designs for you to dress up your Stardoll with. And it's just now it's in the 3D context now, because before it was just 2D like flash images, but you could still buy clothes on the Stardoll platform if you were ever on it. Yeah, exactly. So that to me was my Instagram, my Facebook as when I was a kid. But now it's just kind of like 3D online. But yeah, this is not a new concept. It's just got more popular and more accessible, and different brands can just see the potential in creating for it.
Alyssa, how, from your point of view of kind of, I know you have a background in trends, how have we kind of seen that trend kind of develop? I mean, Jasmine, you kind of touched on it in terms of the pandemic, and that obviously makes me think about, not being able to show Fashion Week physically and finding new ways to communicate with consumers. But yeah, Alyssa, what's your kind of take on that?
I think that in general, people like to express themselves through fashion, period. And I think it was just inevitable that would happen within the metaverse. And so there is a marketplace for people that want to wear luxurious fashion. So it was only, a matter of time before fashion and luxury houses caught on to that, because I think the industry is driven by profit 9 times out of 10. So the fact that there is so much money to be made within the metaverse, I think that trends that we see on social media are just going to carry over through that lens of self-expression.
That was actually my next point of discussion, is whether we think that this is just an opportunity to monetize off consumers, or if it's to engage in new forms of creativity. And I think, is that about a split between fashion gaming and then digital fashion as two different realms? I mean, Taskin, you work in digital fashion as well as physical. How do you find that as a space for being creative? What does that offer you as a designer that working in physical doesn't?
I think we've been talking about the paradigm shift in fashion for so long now, and about sustainability. And I'm actually quite pessimistic about traditional or physical fashion ever being truly sustainable. I think the only way to be sustainable would be actually to just would be abstinence, to not buy anything, and that is just such a tragic outlook. And I think that if we understand the digital sphere as a different reality, a different layer of a collective reality that we, like most of us, kind of live in, that could be a reality where we can be frivolous and where there is abundance and there are no limited resources. And as designers and as consumers and as co-creators, we can do whatever we want. We're not like there are no limitations to our like imagination or to resources. And also, I found that most of the creations I did in physical space, there were no places where people would like be able to wear it. And why would I buy, for example, a Prada ostrich feather boa coat when I cannot wear it anywhere? And I think the digital sphere, social media, metaverses, these are actually the collective realities where we can wear all of these things without harming the planet also.
I mean, Peter, from kind of, we've touched more about those ideas of tech and what that can enable us to do. What's kind of your thoughts on that? And especially in terms of fashion now engaging with this, you know, I know I've said that, you know, this tech's been all around for a while, but is there suddenly some developments which now why is fashion seen this now as a kind of advantage for it to engage in fashion tech in a more forward way? Because I think the industry is somewhat lagged behind others in engaging with these technologies.
Yes, I think for me, it's down to three things. So the tech advancements, the culture around digital fashion and adoption, and then also accessibility. Now, I studied digital fashion at LCF over 10 years ago, and we were kind of the geeks in the corner at that time. We were using Optitex and everyone thought we were freaks, basically like it's never going to work type of thing. But, you know, over the last few years, we have seen, you know, Pro 3D, we've seen TG3D Studio, or, you know, the softwares. Technically, they're just so much more advanced now. So when we talk about fashion, when people in the industry, they like to see things that work very easily, very slick and very polished. It's only recently that the tech itself has been able to advance well enough to do that. In terms of culture, I think it's great that we have people like Taskin, designers now really adopting digital fashion into the design process, and we're seeing more and more of that happen. So it's no longer as, you know, being freaks in the corner doing digital fashion. Actually, it's okay now to have digital fashion as part of the design process, shall we say. And then Jasmine, you touched on it earlier, you know, the accessibility. Obviously, with more and more awareness and adoption of the technology, the costs are just now coming down, where it's actually quite easy for literally any one of us now in this conversation could set up a digital fashion collection and sell it. So I think that's interesting, and the industry has suddenly just caught onto this, that, oh, actually, there's other ways that fashion can be consumed, sold, and created.
Definitely. I want to spin back to talking about that idea of sustainability, which Taskin, you touched on, and kind of links to what you were just saying, Peter, about what digital fashion kind of enables us to do. Taskin, you touched on this again, but do you kind of, when I've read about it, because obviously I'm not a digital fashion designer, but I've read lots of interesting things about, you know, how working in 3D can reduce the time and waste it takes to design. How's that kind of helped your supply chain in terms of, you know, it's a whole different thing working in digital than physical?
Yeah, so while I was studying, like, I mean, there was a couple years ago when I found that as a student, we're doing these crazy productions, like things that actually, like, you would need a whole team for. And also fashion today, I think, is very different from fashion, obviously, like decades ago. Now we don't create garments, but we create like actual worlds surrounding those garments. And so I think that's also where you have, again, this connection to gaming and to the metaverse. But as a student, I found that I can be like super efficient. I can express myself in 3D. I can actually create the surrounding with no compromises. And at the end of the day, I also found that the fashion object of our time doesn't have to be a garment. There were so many examples in the past, also not just in digital, but also when you had, for example, the Ralph Simmons duct tape or like the Supreme brick or something. You had so many funny objects which were not garments, but which were linked to fashion as a cultural practice. And I think that just makes it clear that, of course, also a digital garment or a digital asset can be part of fashion as such.
No, I think that's super interesting, especially thinking about, I've noticed at a lot of fashion weeks recently, the idea of the NFT, which, if you don't know at home, is a non-fungible token, those assets that we mentioned in the intro video. A lot of physical fashion designers are integrating NFTs into their shows as a way to kind of, which I think plays off what you were just saying. So for instance, New York, we had Eckhouse Latte, Altazara did stuff. Last month in Milan, Jordan Luca had, it was like an NFT, and then also you could scan a QR code, and it was like you held up your phone, and then this little kind of block they'd designed kind of would appear then in your space. And just this weekend, yesterday, Roxander at London Fashion Week released an NFT, which was a version of the final runway look, which showed it in physical form as well. And then also last year, Givenchy did this Cheeto NFT. Cheeto's an artist that Matthew Williams had worked with on the collection, but then they released this NFT as part of the pre-collection. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of that it's now becoming a necessity to, even if you're showing physically in physical garments, to have an element of this digital kind of aspect. And I wanted to kind of go back to you, Taskin, and also pull on you, Alyssa, and ask how we feel that this digital world is impacting on the physical. And maybe, Alyssa, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of people, the general public, is really having a hard time wrapping their mind around the concept of digital fashion in general. I made a video on my TikTok kind of discussing this, and a lot of people in the comments were saying, you know, this would never happen. Why would I buy clothes that aren't tangible? And I think as we're starting to see NFTs become available, we're starting to have people kind of dip their toes in what a reality would be like, you know, dressing themselves and expressing themselves through fashion, but instead of doing it to show their peers and friends on social media, they're doing it to dress them at their avatars in the metaverse.
So interesting. Taskin, what do you think?
I think that more and more it will become clear that our online and offline identities are actually not separable. I think like a couple of years ago, we had this idea that, okay, we go home, we log on, we go onto this platform, then we have a different character, we have this different persona, or we can be, obviously we can be whatever we want, whoever we want online. But with social media being such an integral part of our everyday, I think these two entities are so inseparable. Like how I present myself on social media actually affects how I see myself in physical reality, and obviously also affects how other people see me both online and offline. So there is like the digital sphere is like, it is no less than actual reality. And there is so much value to it. And I think it is very important to most of us to being able to express ourselves also online, because it's, yeah, such an integral part of our identity.
I think it's really interesting what you said there about the two becoming intertwined. If we can pull up on the reference screen, I thought that made me think of Maisie Whelan did her New York Fashion Week show earlier in the month, and she did a presentation, and guests were brought into the presentation space, and the models were kind of projected into the space, and they'd almost been styled to look like avatars. And then if you were at home, you could download an AR filter and put those projections into your kind of physical space. And I think it's just quite an interesting example of how, you know, these two are becoming merged, like you were just saying, Taskin. I'd love to talk about this for a minute. Jasmine and Peter, maybe let's hear what you kind of think about this. Jasmine, do you want to go first? Because this is kind of the gaming realm of aesthetics.
Yeah. So as a gamer, I take part in buying skins. When I play any online game, I feel, as a fashionista as well, I feel the need to always make my character look the best, the most exaggerated. Like in Halo, my Spartan's pink, as Kat has like blossoms. I like looking extra when I play online games. But to other gamers, they don't care. They just want to play the game. But for me, I care about how other avatars or how other players see me, because I'm just like, well, I want to make other people mad if I kill them and I have like pink skins, you know? And yeah, as you were saying, the way that you portray yourself on the digital affects you in the real life. So I feel like with this, in the future, there might be a time where we care about what assets do we have. What do you have in your NFT collection? Like, what do you have in your digital like wardrobe? Things like that. Can you give it to someone? You can just lend someone the code for your thing. There'll be a future as well when we can actually integrate these like NFTs and stuff into games. I have no idea like where I can do that now, but I'm looking forward to the future where I can actually download like buy Balenciaga skin and be like, I want to play that in my game. That'd be really sick.
Do you think that, just thinking about the kind of those aesthetics of it, and whether I'm interested in whether physical fashion and digital fashion are kind of, you know, even though physical's dipping its toe in the digital, whether they're kind of still operating as their own kind of microcosms? Like, do you feel like working or, you know, just enjoying fashion gaming, that is its own isolated world, and that fashion gaming doesn't need, like, the gaming world doesn't need fashion needs
100%. Gaming can survive without fashion, like that. They're completely to the other industry. They have like a whole infrastructure that fashion is, you know, a completely separate entity. But I really feel like there should be more of a bridge, more of a connection, because I just get excited when I see collaborations between my favorite brands and my favorite gaming giants and stuff. And it just makes me feel like validated as like someone in both industries. See, like Fortnite Balenciaga, I love that so much because they knew what they were doing. Fortnite is like a kid's game, but they still made it fashion. They still made it ironic. They still made it like, oh, this is a bit silly, but in the long run, they did that. And now other brands would like shortly did them afterwards. So they're kind of slow, you know, they were fast to get Fortnite. They really laid down the groundwork, and they're like, we're the blueprint for this. And we'll always reference that to come. And I'm just so excited because like before, I'd always reference like the League of Legends designing Louis Vuitton trophy. Louis Vuitton designing a League of Legends trophy for the esports 2018 championship. That was something I'd always be like, oh, that was so cool. I want more of that. And I'm just happy that we're getting like elevated high fashion gaming aesthetics. It's not corny, it's not tacky, it's very like in its own thing. And it's just, if you get it, you get it, you know? And I'm just nerding out about it. I'm just happy to see it like in fruition. And I want more. Like, I'm a consumer, I'm a buyer. I'll throw my money at this stuff, you know?
Alyssa, I just want to jump over to you quickly, because I think there's something interesting here. For instance, kind of, if you aren't able to afford Gucci in real life, you'll be way more likely to afford Gucci on a gaming platform because it's done at a fraction of the price. You know, that Dionysus handbag that they sold, I think it was on Zapito or Roblox, I can't remember which one, but it sold for not that much money, and then it got sold to another player for way more than the physical was worth. And I think that's interesting that you can purchase stuff at a fraction of the price, but then, you know, within the gaming world, it then accumulates loads and loads of value. But I'm just interested, from your point of view, why does that benefit a brand like Gucci to be able to sell a digital asset for a fraction of the price of something that they could sell in real life way more?
Because I think in order to initially get people interested, they kind of have to like throw a bone out and see, you know, who's going to pick it up, especially because a lot of people who are traditional Gucci shoppers probably aren't as plugged into technology that is capable of allowing them to express themselves within like a digital space. So I think providing just accessibility is key for brands when they're getting invested in, you know, putting products out at lower price points. And then who knows, this could turn into the next original like supreme resale when kids were buying sneakers and, you know, flipping it for 40 times the price on StockX, we could see the same thing happen in a virtual space. So I think time will really tell, but I feel like the future is bright because, like I said before, people self-expression is within our human nature. So it's just a matter of time before people want to, buy clothes, and whether that's for $4 or $5, yeah, people will buy it. But as time goes on and more people catch on, then brands will be able to start raising the prices because the demand will be there.
In terms of ownership, Peter, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Especially people at home that don't really understand how this works. There's a lot of different components. So it's kind of, you've got digital fashion assets, which might be for your avatar, NFTs and stuff. But in kind of simple terms, how does ownership come into this space?
So with NFTs specifically, so obviously we have the purchaser, so that's the general fashion consumer that can purchase using a platform like the dematerialize that you mentioned in the intro video, which is then validated on the blockchain. So for those of you that don't know, the blockchain is a decentralized network basically that can't be tampered with. So once you have that verification on the blockchain network, you have that digital ID that says X person is the owner of this particular digital asset, and therefore it can just be traded like a physical item in reality. So I think things like that is super exciting. I think going back to what Jasmine and Alyssa were just talking about then, I think there's still a little bit of confusion as to how brands can tap into this new asset class, shall we say, or new ways of giving the general consumer new ownership of fashion products. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
And in terms of kind of that kind of idea of ownership, but I feel like there's this interesting idea where, luxury brands predicate themselves a lot of the time on exclusivity. But then in these spaces, if you're not buying an NFT where you have that kind of ownership on the blockchain, and rather you're kind of, engaging in, the fashion gaming community or something like that, where there's more kind of an unlimited amount of assets. There's not always, but maybe more limited. What do we think about that kind of shift from brands functioning in a way more democratic way than we've seen them before? Peter, what do you think about that?
I think we have to look at this from two different angles. So we have the short-term business strategy, which at the moment most of the fashion brands are doing, and even the designers that you mentioned earlier. It is about brand awareness marketing at this moment in time, and even the NFTs that are available for purchase. They don't seem to be ingrained into a longer-term strategy from what I can see at this moment. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to be there. I think moving forward, time will tell whether these assets are actually valuable in the longer term, and therefore we'll get an ROI or return on investment eventually, or whether somebody's just really overpaid for a digital NFT. Who knows? The possibility is there that is going to happen though.
Taskin, I want to talk about when we're talking about younger brands. So people like, Stefan Cook, the London menswear brand, did a collaboration with The Sims last year. And, people like Moschino and stuff have also done The Sims. But I think it's interesting to talk about these smaller brands who, don't have such a kind of global domination strategy. And it feels more like maybe a slightly more genuine interaction. And I wondered also from the perspective of being a digital fashion designer, going back to what we were talking about earlier a bit, what aspects of this do offer slightly more creative routes when we're not just talking about, creating a brand image and monetizing? Like, what is this? Why are even the younger designers like Stefan Cook excited about this kind of space?
Well, to kind of go back also to this whole NFT topic, I think it was like good overall to push digital fashion because with the whole NFT craze, there's already so much attention. But I am also thinking or hoping that it's only a transitional phase, especially for smaller designers. I don't think that NFTs are like the most exciting thing because they are really like they're non-fungible tokens. They're tokens. It's like a currency. You're kind of bidding on something to like keep some value, like some monetary value, or even be more valuable in future. And I think for smaller designers, the question is more how to make this digital fashion interactive. Like how can you have an immediate conversation or interaction with this? And I think this is why the Stephen Cook Sims collab was so cool, because you could just play it, you could just like literally experience it in that moment. And I think those are actually the projects that I find more interesting than when you have an NFT, because I think, yes, exclusivity is like a very important factor, but when I would buy a luxury physical item, I don't know how many pieces were produced. I think that is like putting it, like that's the pinnacle of exclusivity. And I think that's kind of a boring part of fashion, to know that you have something that other people don't. I think that's only part of it, but like how else do we want to express ourselves? And like I think it can be so much more fun than to like owning something in your wallet and you like kind of show it to others that they don't have it, but you have it. Like I think I would love to see more of these like actual use cases. Or I'm actually working right now on a project where there is a virtual aura surrounding a physical garment. So you would have a garment with like stripes, and then when you look at it through your camera, you have things growing out of it, and you have an immediate like also kind of, it changes the way that how you feel in your body and how you see yourself. And I think these are the projects I'm looking forward to see more.
I want to talk about that kind of aesthetic which we're seeing develop, because in some of these fashion gaming collabs, for instance, the Balenciagas and the Gucci's, on one hand, you kind of have this copy and paste where they'll have a physical collection as well. Like the Fortnite one was kind of hoodies with Fortnite and logos. But then you've got other stuff like Gucci did a trainer called the Virtual 25 trainer, and it was in like bright neon pinks and greens, which felt really un-Gucci in a way. Like the aesthetic of it didn't look very Gucci, and you could see that they'd changed their aesthetic to fit the gaming community, which I thought was quite interesting. So I want to talk about what aesthetic that we're seeing emerging, not just in fashion gaming, but also in digital fashion as its own kind of world. And what we're kind of finding most exciting. I guess, Taskin, let's go back to you, because you are a digital fashion designer as well. So I'd love to hear from you what you're seeing emerge.
So with the metaverse platforms, of course, they are quite low res at the moment. They have to work on different browsers. So it's like an online game, kind of a game without any missions or goals, but people should be able to access it with their computers without having to buy like a really high-end like gaming computer. So that is why these platforms are like, they have a lot of technical limitations. The garments are often not so detailed, but therefore we see a trend that they are like very colorful. You play with like emissive glowing surfaces or animated surfaces. Like you have these very like in your face bright colors. And I am worried that at some point we kind of lose an emotional quality, because it's kind of this like corporate Memphis aesthetic in graphic design, where everything is like very simple and colorful and happy. And I'm actually like, me as a fashion designer with my personal work, I try to have everything a little bit dirty. Like everything, like there is some, like it's colorful, but there's also a layer of, I don't know, like irregularity of like the metal is rusting. It's not always chrome and polished. And I'm hoping to see that this is also evolving more.
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do think that your work's particularly interesting because it very much isn't playing into this kind of, you know, that flat kind of fashion gaming aesthetic. There's much more of this kind of in-between space where the physical and the digital merge, which we've been talking about. And I think that's super interesting in your work, especially. Alyssa, I'd love to hear from you a bit about the kind of trends that we're seeing. Kind of Taskin has touched on it, but I think you're getting this kind of Iris van Herpen almost aesthetic a lot, and kind of sci-fi and metallic aesthetic. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think, you know, I think Taskin's right that sometimes it can all become a bit overwhelming and a bit more of the same. And it all kind of merges into one. So I'd love to hear from you what trends you're seeing in terms of the aesthetics emerging in digital fashion.
Yeah, so I think that in general, at digital fashion, it has become quite post-apocalyptic in nature. So we look at Balenciaga's Fall Winter 21 collection, and it took place in the year 2031. So it was supposed to be sort of a bit of a dystopian kind of aesthetic in a way, because, you know, back, if we think about the pandemic, we're living in a world that no one would have ever predicted. So I think that is being translated into a lot of people's designs and aesthetic and work. This idea of kind of what happens after reality as we know it changes. And so seeing that reflected in a lot of clothes, armor, like that Balenciaga collection, there was a lot of just things that aren't so rosy, beautiful, polished. It's a little bit more rustic. It's a little bit more tactical. And I think that we are really going to start seeing that aesthetic, the post-apocalyptic kind of way of dressing really translate into a lot of digital fashion.
Amazing. I think you talking about post-apocalyptic themes made me think of Imitation of Christ, which are a New York brand who showed a New York Fashion Week, and they've always been a physical brand, but always had these kind of underlying themes of using, you know, upcycling and kind of eco-consciousness. And then they showed a fully digital collection, which we're just grabbing up on the screen now, which interestingly does kind of feed into this metallic kind of sci-fi aesthetic that we've been talking about. But I think that's right, and you're so kind of correct in talking about this in terms of this kind of post-apocalypse. But I'd love to hear from you guys kind of what you thought about this collection and the idea of a physical fashion brand actually making the shift over to digital fashion. Peter, maybe let's start with you.
I think it's really exciting, to be honest. I think it's going to be interesting to understand from a process perspective for the designers moving forward, which is going to come first, the digital fashion element or the physical garment, and then how the two worlds collide together to come up with the final result. I think for me moving forward, fabrics going to be really exciting as a space to see how that develops and influences digital fashion moving forward as well, because you can't really tell now between digital and what's the real fabric, and I think that's quite exciting as well.
And also with this Imitation of Christ collection, as you can see on the screen now, lots of the images that were used were pulled by a photographer from the wildfires in California. So this is all about kind of the planet burning and sustainability. But Peter, I wanted to come back to you because on the flip side of all these amazing things that digital fashion can do, there are obviously these conversations about sustainability, which we've loosely touched on, but, you know, in terms of mining currencies and the effects that this has on global warming. So could you speak a bit about what are the implications that people are worried about, and how is that being improved upon and getting better?
Yeah, so I get sent all of startup pitch decks from digital people who are doing digital fashion, and one of the sells that they always try to do to me is that they are being more sustainable. Actually, digital fashion isn't sustainable. Let's just be upfront about that, because actually it takes so much computing power to create an NFT. As you mentioned there, Hetty, the mining, storage, all of that takes a lot of power. So it's just shifting, and the conversation should be shifting. Okay, we're not necessarily consuming from a raw materials and fibers and fabrics perspective, but we are going to be consuming from an energy consumption perspective. And we need to really think about, okay, so if we are going to be consuming more digital fashion pieces and NFTs, how do we eventually then shift that to be more sustainable? I think that's an important conversation to be had. But in a nutshell, an NFT is actually bad for the planet as well. It's just about which is the less of the two evils, I guess, is the conversation. And ultimately, I'm not saying, of course, we can't have digital fashion, because we still want to have freedom to enjoy fashion, but it's about, okay, out of all the options that we do have, which is then the best to go for?
Because obviously then on the flip side, you've got, you know, if you compare a full-fledged physical fashion week or putting on a fashion show, that has a hugely detrimental effect on the environment. You know, it's fashion month at the moment, press are flying all across the globe. So I guess it is, what's the lesser of two evils, and is this kind of something more of it in its infancy that we can work more towards? Alyssa, I'd love to know from you, we've touched on it being digital New York Fashion Week last month. For instance, the designer Jonathan Simkai put on a fully digital fashion show, which I think had its, there's room to improve on how we do a digital fashion show. But what are your thoughts on in terms of what you can get from a virtual fashion show that you can't get in a physical show?
So I think that piece of just accessibility and imagination, you can really alter different mediums in virtual that you can't do in physical. There's only so many ways that you can distort fabrics. So I think that in the virtual space, creativity can just really blossom. As far as the Jonathan Simkai show, guests were invited to upload a photo of themselves to be created into an avatar. And I think ideas like that are really helping consumers and just showgoers really imagine what a world would look like with them wearing digital clothing and just kind of wrapping their brain around that concept.
And Taskin, would you ever, if you were going to stage a show, would you decide to do it physically, virtually, and why would that be your choice?
So I am still really obviously pro digital. I also must say that I strongly I would like to emphasize that I think using the words digital fashion and NFTs synonyms is, I think, not right. I think digital fashion, as I said before, fashion can come in the shape of any object, and NFTs are one. And in the digital sphere, I think we can, this is the beginning, and right now there's an NFT craze and obsession, and this is pushing digital fashion as well. It's just one part of it. And when I design, for example, the experimentation phase, physically takes up so much resources. Experimentation means that you don't know where you're going. You're playing, you're going this way, then you're going that way again. And doing this on the computer, it does take up electricity, which is also a physical resource, but less than I would usually use. And then if I didn't mint it, but rather find a different way to distribute it. I think that the digital space, we don't need to pretend that everything is so scarce and there's only 100 pieces of this. Let's make it 1 million. Let's make digital space a frivolous party and not about just NFTs. I think this should be part of it only.
Definitely. You touched a bit on this there, but I'm thinking about audience and who is engaging with this. If you stage a digital fashion show, how much more accessible that is. It's not this exclusive closed door event. Alyssa, what are your thoughts on kind of who's engaging with this? We're getting a different kind of community or wider community to engage with brands when they're hosting shows in this way?
Yeah, I think even the Maisie Rowland show, just having people at home that are very passionate about brands and about a designer's work, having them being able to engage in the show just as someone who was invited there is a really special thing. And I think it will really bridge the gap between a lot of people who are low income, don't have the resources to learn design and start really, accelerating their career in fashion. I think learning about new ways to manipulate technology will be a really great access point for people to start getting into new ways of creating fashion.
And Peter, how's that tech recently kind of become more accessible? You touched on that, Alyssa, even just being able to pull up an AR filter through your Instagram or your Snapchat now, stuff that would feel quite unapproachable is now kind of done with the click of a button.
AR is still in its infancy, shall we say. It's still not adopted by everybody. But I think we are going to start seeing that certainly within the next 5 years or so, where it will become easier because of the computing power is going to be less, shall we say, to create the AR elements. So I think that's going to be exciting. I think what's also going to be exciting, I don't know if you guys saw, but the Fabricant recently shifted their business model from a designer to actually a co-creation house, and therefore we can all consume and co-create together digital fashion, and then sell it together as well. So I think mediums like that, when we're talking about the audiences, I think that's quite interesting to see as well.
I think that collaborative idea is really important. I mean, Taskin, you kind of touched on that a minute ago about, moving away from this exclusivity and this kind of reluctance to help one another that I think has come to define a lot of the fashion industry over the last kind of couple of decades even. And that kind of moves me on nicely to an area that I was really interested to talk to all of you about in terms of this idea of representation, and digital fashion and fashion gaming being a space that the consumer can step into and feel included and feel more represented. Jasmine, I wanted to start with you in terms of, you spoke at the beginning about dressing your avatar in virtual skins. How, and at the moment, in how technology stands in the fashion gaming world, how much adaptability is there to create an avatar to really either represent your physical self or create a whole new kind of being?
We have a long way to go. So there was Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and it wasn't as good as we thought it was. They promised us that you can create your own character and make it look just like you, but there was very limited hair options for Afro hair. There was very limited skin color options. There was very limited facial features, and that is just a game industry issue. But I feel like with fashion, because fashion works with different models all the time, so naturally there is this thing of we should represent everyone, because the forefront of fashion is diversity. Not everyone should look the same. We should all look different, celebrate our differences. But in gaming, it is a bit it's not as good as it can be. So that's why people turn to their own programs and they make their own avatars and their own 3D programming stuff. But I wouldn't really I would play if I wanted to make my own character look exactly like me, I'd play something like The Sims. I wouldn't exactly play Animal Crossing or something to make me look completely the same. But there is still a way to go with diversity in gaming and just having avatars that will just look like you. And even there's a lot of gatekeeping and racism in gaming as well. And when there is worlds, a game will have a certain world, people will be well, these types of people don't exist in this world. There's only only aliens exist. Or you're not going to find a Bengali girl in this alien game because we're not seeking, human representation and stuff. So some people will be you're forcing diversity in these worlds where, it's not human, it's not real. It's just a projection of yourself. And yeah, sometimes when I play games, I don't really think about, I want every fiber of my being to be in my game. I want to look exactly like how I want. I just want to look cool in a game. And I think the most important part is just being the player, being the gamer, and not listening to anyone when they say that you're not allowed in a space, because there might be some trolls in the gaming space that might say I don't belong there. I always have fashion. I always have that to say I do belong somewhere. And yeah.
Alyssa, when we're seeing fashion consumers kind of dip their toe in fashion gaming for the first time, do you think we're seeing them create kind of completely different identities, or kind of trying to mirror, I guess, their real life representation? And are we seeing that that's kind of available?
Well, I think there's kind of two sides to that. So I think there's, as we become more inclusive and accepting of all sexualities and genders as a society, that will translate into the metaverse and, people wanting to, even though they may identify as another gender, their physical may not reflect that. So I think the metaverse will be a really great opportunity for people to really express themselves truly who they are. But I think also it could, there's a downside to that, because it could potentially encourage body dysmorphia and kind of losing touch with who you actually are and reality itself. So I think you can really dive deep into that subject, but I think for young people, I think it can be a catalyst of expression. And I have repeated that term a lot, but, as someone who grew up, playing Stardoll, buying so many different, spending real money on digital fashion, I think it will be such a great way for young people to just be who they really are.
Taskin, when you're designing digital garments, am I right in saying that most of the time you photo dress them onto a real life model, or do you use avatars as well?
So I do create my own avatars, but it's so interesting to speak about inclusivity and representation here, because in digital fashion you don't have the infrastructure that you have in traditional fashion. You don't have agencies, you don't pick models and stuff. You have to make everything from scratch. And I think this is why digital fashion is maybe more so of more of a mirror of society than traditional fashion, in the sense that it really shows us what we choose, what we design, what we make from scratch, because it actually really reflects what we value, what we see as the norm, where we actually try to find new paths. But yeah, I think as a digital designer, you have to really be super really reflect on what you're doing, what you're making from scratch, whether are you copying a certain model, are you creating a new model. Also, there's this part of this idea of transhumanism, which I find really cool, that you can actually move beyond your anatomy, because the bodies we were given, we can't really choose. It's kind of not really democratic, or not really just. We're just given something. We can maybe modify it a little bit, but we were just given something. But in digital space, we can move beyond that. We can literally have, as Jasmine said, we can have cat ears, we can have I don't know, cool cool pink fur. It's
I think that's when it gets really exciting, is seeing the positives of how we can kind of look beyond the borders of what we think we have to stay within, and changing things and adapting it. Last year, I don't know if you guys have read it, the Institute of Digital Fashion, who are kind of London organization, they did this report on representation in gaming and in avatars, and spoke to a lot of gamers and a lot of kind of fashion fans using games. And it was just really interesting, because most of the people said that they didn't feel represented and that they needed this technology to evolve. So I think it's really exciting kind of talk about how it can evolve, and how when you can become when you can customize stuff more and access that tech, it really opens up the doors on stuff. I feel like we could stay here all day and chat, but we're nearly at an hour. So I'm going to wrap up, but I'd love to hear from each of you a closing thought on why you think digital fashion, or Jasmine, more in your case, fashion gaming, is kind of important for the industry moving forwards, and one area where you really think we need to see a focus on improvement. Jasmine, let's start with you.
So I just want, gaming is an art form, and the gaming industry they're all artists in their own respect, and fashion, of course, is art. So it's just about how we can borrow from both industries, what we can take inspiration from. And gaming has always borrowed from fashion, and I think now that fashion, it's time to borrow from gaming and see what we can do from that. Also, I really believe in physical possessions and stuff. So I think that the future of NFTs will allow us to have physical stuff. Like Kim Sri, she released them these jade NFT keys. And when you buy the NFT, you can get a dress from her show. And I think that's great. That's great. So I'd love to see more real life integral NFT stuff, because I'm a collector, I'm a dragon. I love having things. So it would be great to use virtual assets to also give me physical stuff in the real life as well. And then I can just transfer that to someone else when I don't want it anymore, and then they can benefit from it too. So
I think that's really important, actually, that we didn't touch on it, because there's so much to touch on. I think it's impossible to go through everything. But that idea, that you can you know, if you maybe buy an NFT or you buy a digital asset from a brand, then that might give you exclusive access. I know we've been talking about it being more accessible, but it gives you kind of possibly exclusive access to something else in terms of building a different kind of community that, you know, it might have that exclusivity, but it's more accessible to kind of get into that kind of idea of community, which I think is so core to the fashion gaming world. And Peter, let's go to you next. So what would be your most important thing moving forward and something to improve on?
I think for me, from a business perspective, digital fashion and NFTs and the metaverse is allowing fashion brands, and not just fashion brands, to do business in a different way. So I think it'd be super exciting to see what new business models arise from this particular category. But I do think that moving forward, fashion brands have to be a little bit less precious, I would say. Like, digital fashion doesn't have to be as refined as it is, as they would deliver like a normal fashion campaign. And once they lower that expectation, I think that's when we're going to really see the full potential of digital fashion.
So exciting. Taskin, let's jump over to you.
Yeah, I think digital fashion is in a kind of transitional phase right now. Many people understand that it's kind of a paradox. We still don't really know like what it means, how we are gonna interact with it eventually. And so I'm hoping that this will become more like a little bit clear, that we will find ways to implement digital fashion into our realities. Also, the idea of hybrid fashion objects, like garments that have a virtual aura that surrounds it. I would love to have digital fashion that changes the way how you feel in your body, how you walk in the street, that it really like changes your like experience in both the online and offline like world, because that is what I'm like really believing in, that these two worlds, analog and digital, they are already so intertwined, and that's why digital fashion is just a kind of natural evolution here.
That hybrid space, I think, is really, really important to, I think, everything that we've spoken about today. But let's close on it. Alyssa, what are your final thoughts?
So I think as we spend more time isolated from each other because of the pandemic, I think that, you know, we're spending more time on our screens, spending more time looking at clothes and different things on a screen. And I think the idea of having a persona through social media is going to really translate into what meta will be. So for brands, just really being able to tap into the consumer and show them that, hey, this isn't so out of touch and out of reach like you think it is. It's simply just expressing who you are through a digital way. And I think as more products continue to roll out, I think, you know, it's just time is going to tell to see what the future will hold for digital fashion in general.
I think time will only tell is a really great way to end, because this really is all in such, you know, an infant stage, and there's so much more that's going to happen with it. We were kind of saying before we started the panel that it'll be interesting to look back on this conversation in 5 years, because I think things will have gone kind of light years ahead. But thank you so much for all joining me. It's been so interesting to hear all of your different perspectives on this. And thank you everyone for watching at home. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.